I'm your host, Andrew Wilkow. All right, for years we've been harping on the need to secure the border from the perspective of sovereignty, the rule of law, economics, the costs that we all bear, and of course, national security. But the problem is already here. You see, if the border were perfectly sealed tomorrow, where no one could tunnel under it, climb over it, or be smuggled through it, we would still be dealing with a major crisis: cancer. And that cancer is the subject of an exclusive two-part Wilkow investigation that you're about to see. See, for the past few months, our investigative team has been working to bring you the facts the mainstream media never would tell you. We sent cameras down to the southern border to speak with people on the ground, informants, law enforcement officers, and investigators to understand the size and scope of the issues we're facing. We begin with an investigation into the alliance between drug cartels, gangs, and corrupt politicians, all colluding in a scheme worth literally hundreds of billions of dollars, with disastrous consequences for America's cities and towns. Here is part one of our investigative series, Cartel in the Heartland.
Planning further terror attacks against the United States.
Al-Qaeda has a senior operative that is so familiar with America.
He's identified as, and they don't know where he is. Shukrit Juma. Al-Qaeda terror activity. Another Mohammed Atta may pose an imminent threat to U.S. interests worldwide. Jafar, the pilot,
narco-terror in charge of all global operations. To truck bomb the Chicago studio was at one time an FBI employee.
That the FBI and Homeland Security was in his
not providing any details about this case.
I'm Chris Farrell, Director of Investigations for Judicial Watch. Back in 2015, we did a documentary film called The Sun City Cell, which had to do with a narco-terror ring operating out of El Paso, Texas, intending to blow up the Sears Tower and Oprah Winfrey's studios.
In 2009, a small plane flown from Mexico into the United States containing two high-ranking Al-Qaeda leaders landed at a private airstrip outside El Paso, Texas. The men met with a group of cartel operatives at a residence nearby Anthony, New Mexico. Leading the meeting was senior Al-Qaeda leader Adnan Shukri Juma.
It was important to conceal the identities of the sources involved because, frankly, they'd be killed if their identities were revealed. And the challenge is that they'd be killed probably from persons on either side of the Mexican-U.S. border. The information they have is so important and so accurate that their identities have got to be protected. Back then, we uncovered a narco-terror ring of militant Islamists set on blowing up the Sears Tower and Oprah Winfrey studios. Back then, I also had a mustache. But in the years since, we've been able to develop that story further.
Also in the meeting, a truck driver named Hector Pedroza Huerta.
Hector Pedroza is an illegal alien who worked for a large transportation services company in El Paso, multiple DUI violations, and a great close friend of Caracra. This is a truck bombing involving a step van, a delivery type van, and a trailer. Both of these vehicles were to be loaded with tannerite, which is a binary explosive. To supplement or to augment the explosion, these same plotters obtained C4, the military plastic explosive. And interestingly, they obtained that C4 from Fort Bliss, Texas, which is in El Paso. El Paso, Texas was the center of a narco-terror ring, a weird mixture of militant Islamist terrorists and Mexican drug cartels who joined forces to move contraband, people, weapons, money, and drugs into the United States.
When you get to Texas, you're running into the Juarez cartel and also the various groups that are associated with them.
Robert Arce is a former federal law enforcement agent who has worked on both sides of the southern border.
Recently, Los Aztecas broke off with them and are now fighting with La Línea and the Juarez cartel. But those groups in Juarez, there's different groups that are tasked with transporting the narcotics into Texas, onto the highways, and then to spread out into the rest of the U.S.
They're in the business to make money, and unfortunately, a lot of their money now is going back to terrorists, the emerging threats.
Derek Maltz was a special agent in the United States Department of Justice. In 2007, he established the Counter-Narco-Terrorism Operations Center.
Chapo Guzman was one of Forbes' wealthiest individuals in the world, right? It's about making money. Of course they do research. They study what law enforcement is doing. They don't want to go to jail, so they look at how they can beat the system. They have no bureaucracy, right? They have no budget constraints. They have no policies. They don't have any real processes like we do in law enforcement to follow. So they're about making money, and they're going to do whatever they have to do to make money.
When you talk about moving contraband across the border, look, it's a business. So whether you're moving people, money, drugs, weapons, whatever it is a large-scale, multi-billion-dollar business that not only entails the use of various techniques in order to shift that much product across the border, but also an incredibly high level of law enforcement corruption. All of this material doesn't cross the border, whether it's at a port of entry or whether it's out in the middle of nowhere of the desert, without there either being complicity on the part of law enforcement or gross negligence.
The politicians and law enforcement are pretty much all in the same boat with the Mexican cartels. Mexican cartels control, I'd say, pretty much every border state in the United States. They control it by controlling the governors, controlling law enforcement, from your federal down to your local law enforcement, and they do that by intimidation and bribes.
And the scale of those bribes is staggering.
Do you have any idea of the scope of the money involved? If you try to put a number on that sort of business, that sort of relationship, is it hundreds of millions? Is it billions? You may not have a number, but
actually, from another source,
one tentacle
advised that for the last number of decades, you had approximately $150 billion with a B dollars in sales of narcotics of all kinds, and pretty much like they teach you in Law Enforcement Academy, about 50%. He said $70 billion went to buy to place governors in office, heads of police, sacks, and they need to ensure that their 1,000 kilos don't get hit at the border.
Like I said, the amount of money involved is off the charts. It's unimaginable. Multiple billions of dollars.
Which brings us back to one of the major distribution hubs along the U.S.-Mexican border. El Paso is located along the Rio Grande. The city sits along the Mexican-United States border across from Juarez. In 2010-2018, El Paso received an All-American City Award. Since January 2014, it's been ranked as the safest, largest city in America.
El Paso is called the safest city in America, but frankly, it's a joke. It really results from police reporting numbers being manipulated and false and misleading information being given to the Justice Department. But the other half of that is that the cartel, principally the Sinaloa cartel and the Vicente Carrillo Fuentes cartel in Juarez, don't want to cause any problems in their own backyard. So they like things nice and quiet in El Paso, where they're trying to move their product, and they take care of all the extreme violence on their side of the border.
On the outside, I'd say it's a very peaceful place to live and to work. On the underside, it's probably one of the most corrupt places in the United States you'll ever see. So it's historically always been that way. And probably a decade ago or so, when other corridors that I know firsthand got jammed up a little bit with too much violence, more traffic moved out here, because even if you had to pay Mordita or whatever arrangement you had to make, you knew for sure narcotics would never be seized. You would get your big road loads across, 100 times out of 100.
The reach of the cartels into not just local and state law enforcement and into the federal law enforcement is pervasive. There's virtually no level of law enforcement that is untouched. There's enormous sums of money involved and incredible discretion on the part of individual law enforcement officers. And sadly, sometimes they get turned. It happens. Controlling the crossing routes, whether it's at the port of entries, the official crossing points, or out in the desert on some back road, that is worth billions of dollars to the cartels. That's how they move their product. That is the essence of moving contraband material. Drugs, money, weapons, people, it doesn't matter. The ability to get across that border is the value that the cartel seeks, and they'll do virtually anything to control that.
Law enforcement veterans say the key to moving massive volumes of contraband is to control the points of entry and the distribution routes.
I believe what's going on right now with, as they're traveling through, the cartels control the smuggling routes, whether it's a human smuggling or the drug trafficking. You don't cross through those routes unless you are paying to those cartels. If you're a smuggler and you're not paying and you get caught, the sentence will be death. They will kill you.
There's ongoing feuds between cartels over not just who controls the routes, but even down to individual loads. And so you'll see that the cartels will fight or engage in sort of ongoing banditry back and forth with each other, whether it has to do with a load of drugs or whether it has to do with movement of people. This is a contested issue, and the turf is fought over and over again.
Most murders in the history of Mexico, May of 2018. Last year, 29,000 people were killed in Mexico. The violence is escalating through the roof. If you look at some of the spillover violence, now, the U.S. government was very cute over the years in defining what spillover violence meant, right? So they used to say, we're not seeing spillover violence, because spillover violence was defined as deliberate attacks against U.S. people, interests, and property. So we really didn't see that, honestly. But what we did see is people getting burned down to a crisp in the middle of Detroit, or we saw people being shot in the head or sliced up in apartments or electrocuted with jumper cables on their ears, okay? We saw kidnappings, home invasions all over America, and it's still going on. And the gang activity.
Chicago is a prime example. The violence that's going on in Chicago is driven by these cartels from primarily down south of our border, the Mexican cartels, and they are utilizing street gang members to move their product. Cartel members are not selling the drugs, they're just moving it. They move it, they send it to the United States. The people who move the drugs are your teenage, young adult gang members that are moving the drugs, whether it's in Chicago, whether it's in Baltimore, whether it's in Indiana. It's spreading everywhere. What you have is the violence that continues to show up with this, and they become younger and younger. So it leaves a very grim future for some of these cities that cannot control.
Well, as you can see, what happens down in Mexico and at the Mexican border has a direct impact on streets across America. The drug dealing, violence, and corruption of our political system all stems from the porous border. The end result is a disaster for you, the law-abiding American. We talk a lot when it comes to immigration about the idea that you can't bring people from over there to here without here turning into there. What is going on with the cartels is that idea on steroids. We are turning parts of America into literal war zones because of the crime the porous border has allowed to flow into our country. We are helping facilitate the sale of destructive drugs that sap the American people of their morale and ruin lives and whole communities. Meanwhile, our political class clearly has no desire to deal with the root cause of the problems, since they are cynically profiting from the crime. But drugs and gangs are only part of the equation. The likes of Hezbollah and other jihadist groups are colluding with the cartels and other street criminals. They're using them to smuggle drugs, weapons, and people, both for profit and fund their terrorism around the world, and to directly aid their efforts against the American homeland. In part 2 of our series, we'll look at the national security threats from transnational terrorist groups benefiting from the cartel in the heartland. Thank you for watching this special episode of Wilkout.